We all want to feel peace in our lives. Peace in our choices, our beliefs, our relationships, and our environment. I've learned that this desired contentment is often found through holding on to less. When we pare down what we own, what we consume, and what we value, we're left with what's intentional, a personalized curation of what is important and true and useful to us. I'm Shannon Leyko, and you're listening to Paring Down, a podcast aimed at helping you declutter not only your home, but any area of your life that's overwhelming. Here, we're having interesting and honest conversations about the physical and mental clutter that drowns out what truly matters to each of us. And together, we'll learn how to pare it all down, not for the sake of perfection or becoming rigid, rather so we can move through life with less overwhelm and more joy, wisdom, and peace. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Paring Down podcast. I feel like the guest of a lifetime today. They say don't meet your heroes, but this is the second time I've met someone that I want to emulate, especially in, my career field. And it did not disappoint. So I say definitely meet your heroes because they are everything and more from what you wanted them to be, at least in my experience. So today on the podcast, I have the one and only Gretchen Rubin with us. Gretchen Rubin is one of today's most influential and thought-provoking observers of happiness and human nature. She is the author of many, many best-selling books. She's a 7-time New York Times bestseller, insane, such as The Happiness Project, which I'm pretty sure everyone on planet Earth has heard of, Better Than Before, The 4 Tendencies, and Life in 5 Senses, which have sold millions of copies in more than 30 languages. Her most recent book is Secrets of Adulthood. And of course, the book that I think all of you probably relate to as you're listening to a decluttering podcast is Outer Order, Inner Calm. That is one of my favorite decluttering books of all time. If you have not read it yet, go check it out from your library, get your hands on a copy. It's like the best practical advice for decluttering. That's all it is. It's just bare bones, practical. Here's what you do. Here's good advice. Here's how you get over the mental roadblocks. It's awesome. It's a tiny little book. Gretchen is also host of the popular podcast Happier with Gretchen Rubin and founder of the award-winning app Happier, which allows people to track their happiness-boosting habits. Gretchen has been interviewed by Oprah, and now me. Hey, she's walked arm in arm with the Dalai Lama. She's had her work reported in a medical journal, been written up in the New Yorker, and she's been an answer on Jeopardy. Pretty fun career, am I right? So you'll hear her story kind of how this career unfolded, but she started out as a lawyer before she was a writer, and I just admire her intellect and her passion and her writing and communication skills on every level. I know you're going to love this conversation and leave it feeling really determined to do things that make you happier, including decluttering your house. So without further ado, dun, 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 here comes Gretchen Rubin. Gretchen, what an absolute honor it is to have you on Paring Down this morning. Thank you so much for being on.
I'm so happy to be talking to you. We're interested in so many of the same things, so I can't wait for our conversation.
Yes, we absolutely are. And I already did a little intro kind of separately from this, but I do love to give my guests the opportunity to introduce themselves, even guests that probably need no introduction like you. So can you please tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, I started my career in law, and I was actually clerking for Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor when I realized that I wanted to be a writer. And my main subject is human nature. So I'm interested in happiness, good habits, how we can change if we want to change, what gets in our way, if we're having trouble making a change that we know would make us happier. And just like, how do we know ourselves so that we can set ourselves up to be happier, healthier, more productive, more creative? And so I write books. I feel like that's my main identity, but I also have a podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, which I do with my sister, my co-host, Elizabeth Kraft, she's a big television writer in Hollywood. She calls me a happiness bully. But she's my co-host in that. And then I have a newsletter, 5 Things Making Me Happy, which is super fun. I have a Secrets of Adulthood on Substack, which is where I share kind of a teaching story. I love teaching stories and aphorisms and fables and proverbs and koans and paradoxes. So that's my outlet for that. And then I have an app called the Happier app, which helps people track their habits. And I have products like journals. I kind of do all the things now, which is part of what I find really fun. I still feel in my heart, I'm an old-fashioned writer, but I feel very fortunate that I live at a time where I can connect with people about ideas in so many different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the amount of resources you offer now is a reflection of how much your writing connects with people and the subject at hand. You know, I think the reason I'm such a fan, as I told you off air, I'm just such a massive fan of yours, is because I feel like you don't necessarily approach this idea of self-agency, personal agency, from like a raw self-help kind of a standpoint. You are very into research, psychology, and personal experience, right? I think
Yeah.
that's was a huge piece of the Happiness Project, which we'll talk about in just a second. But before we get into some more specifics about your work, I'm so curious. Like you said, you worked for Sandra Day O'Connor, which is unbelievable. But how did your life and your career unfold and lead you to writing about this exploration of human nature and personal agency?
Well, that's that's two steps. So tell me which one you want to hear. One is how I switched from law to writing, and then one is how I started writing about kind of the large subject of happiness. Because many people think that the first book that I wrote was the Happiness Project, because that was the first book where most people became aware of me. But like many people, I had worked very hard for 10 years and had published 4 books. 2 were biographies. One was of Winston Churchill and one was of JFK. They were like short, unconventional biographies. My very first book, the book that got me started as a writer, was called Power, Money, Fame, Sex, A User's Guide, which is like this dark, it's kind of a look at human nature through the lens of like a how-to guide. I've always been really interested in how-to guides. And then I wrote this very quirky book called Profane Waste, which was a photo essay about why people destroy their own possessions. So all of these things to me feel very much in line with writing about happiness and good habits and outer order and life in 5 senses, because to me they're all about human nature. But sometimes from the outside people think, oh wow, this looks like it's all over the place, but to me it all feels like very coherent.
Me too. You started with those books. I remember reading about those. And I think even biographies fall in line because you're just learning about someone else's life and why they did what they did and how that impacted their relationships in their life and their legacies. And so I think that shows a true, obviously, interest in human beings, whether it's writing biographies or writing about ourselves or, humanity as a whole. But yeah, I'd love both of those answers. How did you decide to switch from law to writing? Let's start there.
Okay. So I went to law school for all the wrong reasons, right? I'm good at research and writing. I can always change my mind later. It's a great education. It'll keep my options open. My father's a lawyer. He likes being a lawyer. So I didn't know what else to do with myself. So I just drifted into law school. But then I did really well in law school because I'm really good at like following the directions and telling people, if people tell me what to do, I'll just do it. So that suited me very well. So I ended up clerking for Justice O'Connor, which was an amazing experience. Definitely like one of the highlights of my professional life, my professional experience. But I have this habit of I'll often pose rhetorical questions to myself. And so I was like walking around the Capitol grounds one day and I asked myself, well, what am I interested in that like just about everybody in the world is interested in? Like, what is the most interesting subject? And I thought, well, power, money, fame, sex. And it was like power, money, fame, sex. And in my mind, they were all kind of linked as this huge subject. So another thing that I often am in the habit of doing is like becoming intensely interested in a subject and doing enormous amounts of research and reading and note taking about it. So power, money, fame, sex. I just started taking tons of notes and I was reading about it all the time. And then finally it occurred to me, this is the kind of thing a person would do if they were going to write a book. Maybe I could write that book. So I went to the bookstore and got a book called something like How to Write and Sell Your Nonfiction Book Proposal. And I just followed the directions. And indeed, that did become my first book. So that makes it sound a lot easier than it was. But that's basically how I made the switch.
I love that. I love that it just comes from like inside of you, like this natural desire to learn and then to share what you're learning. It definitely speaks in your work. And that's really cool. So you write that first book. And then, like we kind of discussed, you wrote 2 biographies, you wrote the photo essay. Where did you decide I'm going to go and write something that's maybe a little bit more, I don't know, like attractive to like a broader audience, or the Happiness Project? Where did that even come from to start writing about happiness more specifically?
Well, I know exactly. Again, like I will ask myself these rhetorical questions. And so I was in a crowded city bus in the pouring rain, and I didn't have anything to occupy myself with. So I had one of those rare moments of reflection that we don't often get kind of in the busyness of everyday life. And I thought, what do I want from life anyway? And I thought, well, I want to be happy. But I realized I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happy. Could I be happier? Is it possible to make yourself happier? And I thought, wow, I should do a happiness project and like explore all these issues. And so the next day I ran out and started to just like checked out an enormous stack of books from the library on anything I could get: science, philosophy, memoirs, novels, anything I could that just touched on it. And I started researching and taking notes. And again, this is very familiar to me. I have done this so many times in my life, but this subject, it was just going to be for me. Right. I was just doing this as like one of my many research projects. And but it was so fascinating, and it was so limitless. And there were so many things that I wanted to try that finally I thought, well, maybe I could write in my next book and like really work through all this, because there was a lot of things that confused me about happiness. And like the only way I can understand things is to write about them. For a lot of people, research is me search, and that is definitely true of the way I write. Like if I'm trying to figure something out, I will write about it. And so that is what turned into the Happiness Project. And then what I found is that like I had only begun to understand the subject, the larger subject of how do we make our lives happier. And so ever since then, my books, all of them kind of address that, but by going kind of deep in one area. So one is Happier at Home, which is like, how can we be happy at home? If you're not happy at home, it's hard to be happy. So that was Happier at Home. Outer Order, Inner Calm. That was like a little hooky book that I did because I just love that subject. Like, why is it that Outer Order contributes so much to inner calm? I was just like baffled by that. I wrote a big book about habit change because called Better Than Before, because one of the things you realize is that if people are trying to change their habits, there's a lot of different ways that work or don't work for different people. And when you're setting happiness, a lot of times people know perfectly well what would make them happier. They just have trouble doing it. And that's a problem of habit formation often. I came up with this personality framework called the 4 Tendencies. Everybody should take my quiz. Go to my website and take the 4 Tendencies quiz. It'll blow your minds. So I've just been sort of going deeper and deeper and deeper ever since.
Yes. And of course, Life in 5 Senses. I love that
I didn't mention that. Oh, I'm so glad you like. I loved writing that book. Oh my gosh.
It seemed like you loved writing that book. I actually listened to that one on audio. I love when you narrate. I love, I've with the Happiness Project, I did both. I read it, just like old fashioned book style. And then I also listened to the audio, and I just think you have such a gift for making your words come alive. And it's actually interesting. You mentioned to you off air how I've worked on my book proposal, and hopefully that will be going out into the market this year. And one of the things that I've gotten feedback from with my writing in the past, I have a self-published book and a blog, is people say, I hear your voice in my head when you're reading, that, like you have a really strong voice. Yes. And I always thought, well, that's silly. And that just must be people who know me personally, not people who just hear me online. But then I'd get feedback from followers like, gosh, you're just in my head when I'm reading. I hear your voice. And then I realized, who does that for me is Gretchen Rubin. Like your writing voice is so distinct and in line with your speaking voice. And I think that's what makes it so powerful, is you're able to take the way you talk in person, the animation and the passion and the relatability, and you turn that into writing. And that's something I'm most proud of about my work with the feedback, as I think about that, of what I want to hone in my own writing. Is like, people really can hear my voice, and you do that so well. So I want to tell people, listen to the audiobooks too. They're so good.
That's so nice. That's so nice to hear. It's funny. I was just thinking about that about C.S. Lewis. I was like, you could take any sentence from a C.S. Lewis book, whether fiction, like a Narnia book or a book that he wrote for adults, and there's something about C.S. Lewis where I'm like, I bet I could pick it out. He just has a certain very, very strong voice, but it's like, it's how do you put your finger on it? It's not like he has this quirky vocabulary. It just has a very, so anyway, that's a huge compliment. I'm so happy to hear that. And well done, both of us.
Look at us go.
That kind of, look at us. That's so great.
Yes. And so I listened to the Life in 5 Senses, and it seemed like a really fun book to write all your different kind of experiments you did. And I'm going to ask a question about that book. I'm getting ahead of myself too, but back to the Happiness Project a little bit. Why do you think that it took off the way it did? I have my theories, but I'm curious why you think it took off.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, part of it, I think, is that there was a lot more interest in happiness. Like, before my book, people were only just sort of starting to study it, but there had been a lot of academic research. So there was a lot of interesting research to discuss. So I think that was part of, I was able to bring to it. I think one of the things that was interesting is, like, when I was trying to sell the book, a lot of people said, hey, Gretchen, you're kind of boring. You're pretty happy when you start and you're pretty happy when you end. Like, there is no arc. And I was like, well, I'm sorry that I cannot develop like a crippling addiction in order to make it more dramatic or something like that. This is what I am. And a lot of people were like, well, you can't be earnest. Like, it has to be ironic. And I thought, I'm just very earnest. This is all very heartfelt. So I think that there was a hunger for a kind of material that nobody thought there was an appetite for, which was a pretty ordinary person dealing by doing ordinary things, not doing big, bold things like traveling across the world or doing a 6-month silent meditation retreat, but just like, what could an ordinary person do without spending a lot of time, energy, or money to get the low-hanging fruit about how to be happier? And how would you do that in kind of a systematic, because I divided into themes, and each month has its theme, and each theme has its 3 or 4 things that I try. So I think for people who are systematic or kind of like that approach, it was satisfying. And it's a year. I think we're very attracted to the idea of a year feels long enough that you can really change, but not so long that you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm committing to something for the rest of my life. And I just do think that for a lot of people, they would read some things and think, you know what, I could do that in my own life. And then it really would make them happier. Even sometimes the very small things end up giving you kind of a disproportionate jolt of happiness. So that's what I think, but I'm curious to know, what do you think?
Well, I all of those things, 100%. And I wrote down the very first thing you said is exactly what I had written. I said, I think that it's really powerful that you admitted your life was pretty great already, right? You weren't writing about a huge transformation from long suffering pain into this everyday euphoria, right? You gave people permission. I know you gave me permission to say, I want more from life, even though my life isn't bad.
Yes.
And that is really important, because while there is so much inspiration in people who are going from one extreme to another or making these big transformations, like you said, there are a lot of us out here who feel like, I know life is good on paper. And is there something selfish about wanting to be happier than I am? Mm-hmm. I should already be happier, And so I think you connected with so many of us who feel that way. And, in that vein, how would you respond to someone who says that, or who feels guilty or silly for wanting a more fulfilling life?
Right. No. Well, but first of all, you're exactly right. One of the things I wanted to do with my happiness project was to have more appreciation for the happiness that I already had. Because it's very we have to be very, very purposeful about being grateful, because it's so easy to take the good things for granted and kind of focus on the bad things. But this is what I would say to people who think that it's selfish to think about their own happiness, or maybe they think what many people say is look, in a world full of suffering and injustice, it's not morally appropriate for someone like me to worry about my own happiness, Or they think that happy people are kind of smug and self-complacent and just kind of very just self-indulgent. But what the research shows, and I think if people think about the people in their own lives, they will see this kind of enacted, is that happier people are actually more interested in the problems of the world, and they're more interested in the problems of other people. They donate more time, they donate more money, they're more likely to help out if a friend or a family member or a colleague or a neighbor needs a hand. They have healthier habits, they're more likely to vote. They suffer less with burnout. They have fewer kind of like negative habits. They make better team members and better leaders. We kind of have this idea that like people don't like being around like happy people, that like everybody's sort of like annoyed by this kind of like saccharine sweetness. It's not true. People are attracted to happier people. Like what happier people tend to make people happier. We kind of like take energy from that, and so they do attract others. And so, you know, which makes sense, because if you're unhappy, it's much easier to become defensive and isolated and preoccupied with your own problems because you're not very happy. And so being happier actually lets you turn outward and think about other people and the pain of the world. You know, it gives you more emotional wherewithal to bear that. And so I always say to people like, well, if you think it's selfish to be happier, you should be selfish, if only for selfless reasons, because this is actually going to equip you better to serve others.
I love that answer. I think it's really important to be said, especially in kind of Western society where there is this me culture. Let me focus on my own happiness, but then people are sadder than ever. And I think that a lot of that has to do with focusing on our happiness in very kind of shallow ways. And the ideas you bring to the table are not make yourself happier by, you know, just cutting off anything that's difficult or any difficult relationships, or by taking a bubble bath, right? I mean, that, you know, that could be part of your senses, right? That we talk about, but like there's a deeper level here that is often, it's very outward oriented, which we know the research suggests the more generous we are, the happier we are, which is counterintuitive to the messaging that we get, especially on social media, that, you know, me first, think about you first, and that's going to make you happier. When in reality, when you're outside yourself, you're happier.
Well, the reason why this is confusing, and you put your finger on exactly something that was so confusing to me when I was writing the Happiness Project, it took me forever to understand it, is, okay, two truths are both true. One of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy. This is true, and it's one of the nicest things about human nature. One of the best ways to make yourself happy is to make other people happy. But what is just as true is that one of the best ways to make other people happy is to be happy yourself. Both of these things are true. They lift each other up. And so by working on your own happiness, you actually are helping to make other people happy. But it's also true that by helping other people, you will make yourself happy. If you volunteer more, you're probably likely to get happier. That's helper's high. Like, we really benefit from that. But it's also true, you got to think about your own happiness. Both things are true. And I think you're right. I think that sometimes like people get pulled kind of thinking that one or the other is kind of true. And then they get caught in kind of the downsides or limitations of that approach. So people who are trying to make other people happy become too self-sacrificing. They're not taking care of themselves. They can become resentful. They can become burned out. And they don't understand why, because they're like, isn't this supposed to make me happy? But then the people who are completely focused on themselves and never think about other people, well, then they can kind of become too navel gazing. And so we have to think about both things, but they actually support each other when we're working on both sides of the equation.
Isn't that just the truth with so many things in life, that the pendulum swings in both directions, and you're like, wait.
Yes, both are true. No, it's so true. People we really want like the answer, and this is it. And it's like, often it's like, it depends. Both are true. Your mileage may vary. You know, it's like, it's often, the truth is not so straightforward often.
No, it is certainly not. You know, it reminds me, actually, I just wrote a Substack post about the two different kinds of self-care. There's passive self-care and there's active self-care. And it is usually someone taking one side and saying, okay, so people who say passive self-care is what matters are the kind of people who say, just take bubble baths and be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself. You know, it's this very kind of soothing thing, but then they might just kind of land in the land of laziness. Like they never actually get up and do the things that will actually bring them satisfaction in life. Then you have active self-care people who say you need to wake up at 5 a.m. You need to go on a run. You need to eat, you know, track your macros and do the things that matter to you, and, you know, blah, 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 and have everything time blocked perfectly in your life. And so that's what self-care is. As well, they're both self-care. And it's the combination of the two that is going to lead to, you know, a better well-being. So.
Well, this is one of the things why I think vocabulary can be really helpful, because I think just having a way to describe it because there's no judgment. It's just like, obviously everybody understands the difference between like rewatching your favorite episode of the Office and like taking a class in ceramics, right? So it's not like you're not saying it's negative that it's passive or active. It's just, it's a different quality. But now we have a vocabulary. So you could say to your sister, hey, I think that maybe you're kind of over indexing on one thing. You need to like think about, are you incorporating enough of this other kind of activity? And so that's one of the reasons why I think that like just vocabulary, terms, metaphors can be so useful, because then we can talk about these things in a kind of impersonal way. It's like, it's not like, you need to get off the sofa and get out there, you know what I mean? Which sounds very judgy. It's just like, hey, I think maybe taking a bike ride might lift your spirits more than just like doing a jigsaw puzzle while you listen to a podcast for the 8th hour in a row,
Right. No, and I think that's one of my favorite parts, I'm sure it is for you too, of being a words person, is that the more words we're exposed to, the more we're able to understand the world around us. It's one of the most exciting things for me about reading and about research and about all the things that you and I both love so much. So I think that's really cool. And, I think that's part of, you're very known for putting things in a way that resonates with people. Just like you can pull one sentence out of your book, which is kind of what you did with Secrets of Adulthood. We'll get there. But I'm even thinking of the days are long, but the years are short, right? Like when you wrote that, all of us were like, I have little kids. I'm like, yes. Woo, is that not the truth? You really engage readers with your words, with the way that you put words together. And obviously that became a huge part of the Happiness Project's success, and why people felt so compelled to do their own happiness projects. And even as I was listening to Life in Five Senses, I found myself really implementing everything you talk about. You just make the people listening want to do what you're doing. Like, do I really know what this raspberry tastes like?
Right. Or what color is the inside of a blueberry? Or like, I need to go try some Heinz ketchup right now. Right.
100%. Exactly.
Good.
Or like, am I listening to music that like I really enjoy? Am I delighting my senses to increase my, my well-being, my happiness, and my understanding of the world around me? Like, I loved when you discovered that you're not necessarily a lover of specific artists or genres. And so you had thought, maybe I'm just not a music person. But when you identified you're a lover of specific songs, and so you could create that playlist that really lifted you up, I thought, that's so true. Like, I often feel lame, for the way that I don't connect with music, maybe as my friends who love to go to shows. But then I realized, no, like I can geek out over, like I think about the opening song in Book of Mormon. And I just think that the music in that song is unbelievable. And I could listen to Hello from Book of Mormon 1,000 times because I just love it. And I was like, oh, maybe I'm kind of like Gretchen. I'm more of a song person. Right. And so anyway, the point of saying all of that, besides obviously it's making myself kind of embarrassing fangirl moment, I get very excited about what you write about, is that you make people want to change themselves. It's not just about you, and it's not just about the broader audience as a whole. It's about each individual reading your book and to get themselves off of autopilot. That's really where I was going here, is you help people get off of autopilot by waking up to these different things going on around them. How do you personally, when you're outside of writing a book, maybe you're never outside of writing a book, knowing how you operate, really, but how do you personally go about regularly identifying habits or routines that you've fallen into in order to assess if you've accidentally, been on autopilot?
Well, this is a huge challenge for me because I am somebody who I will just be. So that's one of the reasons I wrote Life in Five Senses, because I was just so up in my head. I just don't notice anything. And like so much of happiness is like, being purposeful and intentional. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's such a challenge for me. So that's why I keep writing about it. One thing I do is I do really try to just notice how I'm feeling about things. And so I have a new puppy, Taffy. And one of the things that I've become very aware of is like, I love routine. I tend to have routines that I'm an upholder in the Four Tendencies personality framework. And so I thrive on routines, and I feel like, I get energized from sort of productivity. And I had to say, my husband and I, we have a 10-year-old dog, and we kind of had forgotten how much work a puppy is. And my husband's a night person and I'm a morning person. And so like he does the end of the day, the night, and I do the morning. And Taffy is just like cutting right into my most valuable writing time, which is like from 5 to 9 a.m. That's exactly when Taffy is up and wants to go outside and eat and drink and play and all this. And I had to just say to myself, okay, like, don't let this just completely overwhelm me or drain me or make me in a really bad mood. It's a season. She's like this now. She won't be like this forever. In the grand scheme of life, a couple months isn't going to make a difference. I can rejigger my schedule, but I had to really talk myself through that instead of just being like, oh my gosh, I'll never get my next book written because I'm losing all these precious hours, and then not even enjoying having a puppy, which is, that's the danger, is that you're so concerned, or at least the danger for me. I'm so concerned about execution and moving forward and efficiency that I don't stop. And that's why I wrote Life in Five Senses, that I don't even enjoy that I'm walking on the beach. Like I'm so busy rewriting a paragraph in my head that I don't even notice what's around me. So I have to make a big effort to do this all the time. It does not come naturally to me.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I have to actively say to myself, be present right now, yep. Enjoy this, especially with kids. And I obviously love my children more than anything on the planet. It goes without saying, but there's often times where I want to just finish the task at hand. I'm like you, especially in the summer right now, and I really like to have my schedule of how hard I'm working on certain things. I'm a very self-motivated person. I will time block. I'm doing this from 9 to 10, 10 to 11, 11 to 12. I have it all, worked out. And then my kids are home. So it's really, you work in the pockets, which I don't do as well with. And so that's such a good point to make sure that we're staying mindful and present in the moment, just through actively telling ourselves to be there.
My sister always says that I would have been a great monk, because the idea of having like every hour accounted for with like its special activity or whatever just sounds like bliss to me. But in everyday life, it's just like it's very hard to pull that off. I mean, there's your family, but then there's like, you have to have a Zoom call, and there's this, it's very hard to have an extremely regular life, even if that's what you want. A lot of people don't even want that, but some people, it sounds like you and I are the same, where we love that.
Mm-hmm. Hey guys, it's time for your ad break. Each week I like to say a huge thank you for your graciousness that these are part of the podcast. Here we go. You wrote a book that I think my audience is very familiar with, because I talk about decluttering, and it's called Outer Order, Inner Calm. You've already mentioned it a little bit. It's a lot about how decluttering is a pathway to get off of this autopilot in life. So why did you feel that subject specifically, it kind of, I think, from what I understand, came out of writing The Happiness Project, because that was one of your months of The Happiness Project. So why did you feel that one aligned so much with your overarching mission to write about human nature and happiness that it needed its own book?
Well, I'd always been very puzzled by why was it that I got such a jolt of happiness and energy and good cheer from clearing clutter. Like a friend of mine said, I finally cleaned out my fridge and now I know I can switch careers. And I was like, I get it. Like, I know that feeling. And I was always puzzled because it's like, it just felt disproportionate. I was like, in the context of a happy life, cleaning out your coat closet, it just is pretty inconsequential. And yet there seemed to be this sort of disproportionate charge. And I will often, like if I'm feeling blue or something, I will kind of prophylactically clear clutter, because it just calms me and energizes me. So I sort of use it to cheer myself up. So I was very curious about this, and that got me really interested in just learning more about it, and sort of like, what were the easy ways to clear clutter, and how can you maintain clutter once you've cleared it out, which is its own separate challenge. And so I did something that is very typical of me, which is I started a hooky book. So often when I write a big book, like I wrote Happier at Home or something, I'll start working on a little book on the side just for fun. And I call it a hooky book because I'm working on it when I should really be writing on my main book. But now I shouldn't even really call it hooky books, because these are often published as kind of But yeah, exactly. Out of Order Intercom, Secrets of Adulthood. Also, my book Four Tendencies, because really, I wrote the book Better Than Before, which is all about everything you need to know about how to change habits. But everybody was just like, but I want to know more about the Four Tendencies. So I was like, okay, well, I'll write something about the Four Tendencies. So that's just like it's a small book in that it's extremely specific. It's just about the Four Tendencies, which is a very large subject, but so I started it for that reason, and because I just loved even thinking about it. Like, you get just like this, like a before and after transformation. Like, what are all the? I would learn like a hack or a trick or something, and I just couldn't bear to let it be forgotten, and so I would put it in this book. And like I just had this just giant mass of notes, and then at a certain point, I'm like, wow, maybe this could be a book. It's just like all this like cool material. I want to do justice to it, and so then I started organizing it and cleaning it out, and like many creative projects, I was like, this is going to be easy and fun. And then it's like, actually, it's really hard to do anything well. So it ended up being quite a lot of work. But it was super fun because there's just something, it's so concrete. It's so immediate. There is just something about creating order and beauty in our surroundings. And then, of course, that led me into Life in Five Senses in a way that I didn't even know. It was kind of leading me in that direction in terms of like focusing on our surroundings and noticing elements of our surroundings. So again, everything connects, but that's how I happened to write that book. And I had so much fun to write that book.
It's like before you know it, you need a hooky book from your hooky book. You're like, wait.
I know. Well, that's true. Well, it's funny because not all my books become published. Like I was so preoccupied with the subject of color, which I did manage to put somewhat in Life in Five Senses, but I mean, I can't even tell you. I was so deep in color. I have like these giant bookshelves full of books about color. And I wrote this thing called My Color Pilgrimage, which is like my hooky book about color, which I love. But I've shown it to a few people and they're kind of like, well, you really had fun doing that, didn't you? And I'm like, that's not the response that I'm looking for. But one of the things I want to do in 2026 is I'm like, I got to return to that because I love that book. It's odd, it's short, it's weird, it's about color, but I got to go back to it and see if I can turn it into something. So yeah, it'll be a rehooky book. I'll return to it.
I love that. I mean, that just speaks to how much you have inside of you that you want to put out into the world and your passion and interest in the world around you. So Outer Order Intercom, I mean, you obviously summed it up perfectly. It's such a cool book, Gretchen. I just have to say, I recommend it to so many people because while there's so much, I think what you did in the Happiness Project and then led into, like you said, Outer Order Intercom led to Five Senses. So those kind of bigger books, and I have to admittedly, I haven't read Happier at Home. I need to go get that from the library.
My sister says that's her favorite of my books. So
really, okay,
yeah, I loved writing. I love all my books. So I'm like, oh, I love that book. Yeah, I'm like, yeah, I love them all. Yes,
that's a good sign. That's a good sign that you love your books. But those kind of bigger ones, they take decluttering or touch or whatever, the subject at hand and talk about it maybe on a little bit of a deeper level about how it applies to our happiness and our personal agency. And it's kind of this catalyst, which is similar to what I talk about here on the podcast, right? Decluttering for me, it's not just about the act of making your closet look nice, although it is fun to open your closet and stare at your hard work because that is satisfying. Yes. The idea is exactly what you talked about how it makes you think about your five senses. It makes you consider what is actually important and what is not, and how that can be a really important skill in life in general. What is important to keep in your life, what's not. It all leads to intentionality. But what you did with Outer Order Intercom is you didn't necessarily write a book that went in deep about this whole idea of intentional living. You just gave everyone the tools, the actual practical tools they need
it's
to do the thing.
Yes. It's funny because I was like, since it's about like clutter clearing, I think this is a book where like every excess has to be sucked away. It has to be just like a book you could just zip through. Like it's got to have that feeling. Exactly. Like it's not that those aren't really, really important, but this is the book that's just like, okay, you want to do it. Give me some ideas to get me started. Yeah.
Yes, I always say you can't declutter unless you actually just declutter. You have to do it. You can't just talk about why it's great. And that's what your book really offers. And so when Secrets of Adulthood came out earlier this year, I was so excited. I have obviously my copy of it. It's one of those books that I was laughing to myself because I love to highlight in nonfiction books. It's like my favorite way of connecting. And unfortunately for me, this book is just one big highlight because every aphorism is so good. I'm like, oh, yes, that applies to my life. And then I laughed. I was like, she wrote a book of highlighted sentences.
That's so nice. That's great.
That's what you did.
That's great. Oh, that's great. Like everything else is left out. It's just the highlighted parts. Yes. Oh, yes. That's so fun. Yes. Thank you.
But would you share, in terms of Secrets of Adulthood, your latest book, what is an aphorism and why did you decide to put them all in one place?
Well, yeah, it's called Secrets of Adulthood, Simple Truths for Our Complex Lives, because I didn't want to use the word aphorism because nobody knows what an aphorism is. So an aphorism is a general observation about human nature that's attributed to a person. So this is like Mark Twain said it, or Montesquieu said it, or whatever. It's not a proverb. So a proverb is folk wisdom. These are things like a stumble may prevent a fall, or a lid for every pot, or whatever. These are words that they're just lost in the sands of time, whoever originally said them. So an aphorism is something that you can tie to a particular person. And I, in my books, increasingly over the years, I had really pushed myself to try to embrace the form of the aphorism, because it is really the creative challenge of distilling a big idea into just a sentence or two. And as we all know, that can be really hard. You know, there's that old joke about, I'm sorry I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write a short one. And so to really just crystallize a complex idea into a single sentence or something was very intellectually and creatively challenging and fun. But also, I think when you say it in a very short way, it has more power in the mind, because then you can sort of like, you can articulate the idea in just like a phrase, like accept yourself and also expect more from yourself. Right. That took me months of thinking, and it took me pages to explain it. But then in the end, accept yourself and also expect more from yourself. That's kind of the crystallized version. And then that can kind of stand in the mind. And then, you know, my next book is going to be about the empty nest, Project Empty Nest. And my two daughters were going out in the world, and I wanted to collect for them all the lessons that I learned the hard way through time and experience to give to them. But then also I realized, man, I need to remind myself of these just as much as anybody else. Like, working is one of the most dangerous forms of procrastination. I mean, I think about that like at least once a week, probably more. And so I needed to collect them for myself too. So a lot of strands came together in making this book.
Yes. As I was reading it, I was definitely thinking this is one I want to keep on my shelf. And it's like mandatory reading for my kids as teenagers. I have a couple of those where I'm like, these are my kids' teenager books, you know, because it is so helpful just to be able to go into the world having this wisdom that is so hard won from you. And it's funny that you bring up the one where you said accept yourself and expect more from yourself, because that's one of the ones I wanted to ask you about, because it's really sticky. I think all of the aphorisms, what makes them so great is, like you said, because they're really big ideas and important ideas distilled down, they stick with us. I call that sticky writing. And accept yourself and expect more from yourself is just one that stays with you. And I do believe that originally developed from Outer Order Inner Calm. Can you share more about like where you first came up with that one and why that started kind of permeating in your brain, and expand a little bit on its importance to you?
Well, again, I was like facing a tension in trying to understand happiness, because on the one hand, we're told, and we know it's true, like we should accept ourselves. We should show compassion to ourselves. We shouldn't get distracted by a fantasy self that isn't who we really are. So we want to accept ourselves. But on the other hand, we want to expect more from ourselves. We want to learn, we want to grow, we want to stretch, we want to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone. But so sometimes I would think about one and then I would think about the other, and I'm like, okay, well, which is right? And then I realized they're both right. We want to accept ourselves and expect more from ourselves. And what's helpful about this is like only you know if something that you're thinking about, are you accepting yourself or should you expect more from yourself? Like I'm a fearful driver. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. So, I mean, I was driving at 16, but now I live in New York City. I've always been a fearful driver. My sister is also a fearful driver, but because I live in New York City, I hardly ever drive. And I kind of just want to give it up. I just kind of want to say, you know what, this just isn't me. I'm just not going to drive. But I'm like, no, I can expect this of myself. And like, one of the things I want to do is like get over really work on my driving, because it's a really useful life skill. And I know I'm a perfectly good driver. So it would have been easy and pleasant to let go of this and not grapple with my anxiety. But I was like, no, this is a place where I really want to expect more for myself. So this comes up a lot, like in our careers, where like, am I going to raise my hand about giving that big presentation? Am I going to try to go for a higher level certification? It comes up in parenting where sometimes you're like, okay, should we just like hang around the house this weekend, or like should we get it together and go on that overnight camping trip? And you're like, oh gosh, I really want to just like stay home, take it easy. But you're like, come on, we can do it. We will be glad we did. Like, let's expect more from ourselves as a family, and like push ourselves to do something if it's going to be when it's going to ask more from us, So both are true, because if you're constantly pushing yourself, that's not good. Mm-hmm. But then if you're too accepting of yourself, that's not good either. Both are true.
Yep. Yeah. It's really good. It can relate so perfectly to getting your house in order. When I talk about decluttering, a lot of times people will just say, well, I'm just a messy person. Right. And yes, we want to accept that piece of who we are. We don't need to try and force ourselves to be, some hyper-vigilant type of person that runs their household like a militant, military person. But, we need to expect more from ourselves, because it's good for ourselves. It's good for our health. It's good for our surroundings, our family. Right. Like, and there's that level.
That's a perfect example where you can say, I can accept the way that I am, and I can expect myself to do more.
Yeah. And you do have an entire, section of the book dedicated specifically to housekeeping, which I obviously loved and was really fun. And one of the things you write is that someplace keep an empty shelf, someplace keep a junk drawer. So what's the greater lesson in that?
Okay. Well, first of all, do you agree?
Yes, 100%. Okay. People say all the time, well, how do you get rid of your junk drawer? And I was like, I didn't.
Right. So. Yes, we need a junk drawer. Well, someplace keep an empty shelf. I think this is just a luxury. It's kind of a symbol to ourselves that there's room to expand, that we don't have to fill every space. There is just something about an empty shelf that I think is just aesthetically pleasing. It's just nice to know that someplace in your house or your apartment, there's an empty shelf. Now I have to guard my empty shelf, because my husband's the kind that's like, oh, there's an empty shelf. Let me put this bottle of aspirin there. And I'm like, no, that goes on the shelf with we have
the same husband.
Yeah. You have to guard it. But then the junk drawer, I think a junk drawer is great, because if you maintain an orderly house, you know perfectly well what's in the junk drawer. Like, you're like, if I don't know where it is, it's probably in the junk drawer. In my house, it's called my special drawer. They're like, is it in mom's special drawer? And the special drawer is like all the stuff. But it's also fun to have a place where you're like, gosh, I forgot about that thing. Like, there's that thing. For somehow, like, I don't even know why, somebody gave me this really heavy red leather. It looks like a big keychain, Bob, but it has like a little magnifying glass on it. So I guess it's like the kind of thing, like if you were very elegant, you would pull it out at a restaurant and use it to read the menu or something like that. I don't even know what it's for, right? But it's so cunning. I'm like, I like it. I love it. Like my test is, do I need it? Do I use it? Do I love it? And I'm like, I don't need it. I don't really use it, but I do love it. And I'm like, it's small. I'll just put it in the junk drawer. And every once in a while I come across it and I'm like, there's that thing. I really like that thing. Maybe I can use that thing someday, but I just like having it in the junk drawer.
Well, it's a perfect physical boundary for letting like you said, letting that kind of messy side of you out, and that part of you that likes to discover things. There just needs to be a boundary around it, because if we decide that that's going to be our whole house, then your whole house is the junk drawer, and that's really overwhelming. But when you have the physical boundary and say, in this drawer, I can put random things, and that forces you to make sure that they're small things. We're not keeping humongous things that we have to step over, right? Like it kind of just gives you it gives you that permission to be a little bit messy within a boundary.
And speaking of messy little things, let me share one of my favorite. This is like one of the hacks that I'm like most proud of. So when you have little kids, at least for me, you can tell me if you have the same experience, they get all this little stuff. Like it's a Super Ball. It's a little teeny tiny set of colored pencils. It's a tiny figurine of a polar bear. It's like, there's all this little stuff, and it's cute and it's fun. But where do you put it? Because it doesn't really go anywhere. And it's small. So it's just sort of like, it just kind of permeates every corner. It feels like. So what I did is I went and I got apothecary jars. Now I got glass jars, but I wish I had gotten like acrylic or lucite or, something like that, plastic. And then I just like 5 of them and just dumped all that stuff in there. And what's great is they look really cool on a shelf because they're colorful and kind of interesting. So they're very decorative. And then if you have a little kid come over and they're bored, you just say like, you just get out a jar and you're like, look through the jar. Or like, a little, my daughters would have a friend over. I'm like, you can each pick out one thing to keep from the jar. They would spend hours looking at every single thing. What's the best thing? Like, and then it's like, oh, it's time to put it away. You just sweep it all in the jar. And then when that stuff comes into the house, it's like, oh, it goes in a jar. I'm still putting stuff in the jars, and my daughters are in their 20s because I'll be like, this is just like this cool little thing. Like, I have a place for it. It belongs there. Sometimes my daughters will do like art projects and they'll go in there and like get like bits and bobs. It's just something. There's something about that discovery, like that wanting to like sort through things and look for treasures. But then how do you store them? And this is a way to kind of make them decorative, but also make it very clear that that's where they belong.
Okay, I love that. I will be implementing that in my own house because that is a struggle I have is I don't want in their kind of toy play area for things to just kind of die in oblivion at the bottom of a basket.
Yes.
Like to me, that's clutter.
Yes.
But you're right that there is something messy about they like to dig through things and they like to discover things. And so how do you manage both of those things? And that is a solution. Hello. That's brilliant. Okay. I love that.
And then
Thanks.
It's like an activity. Yeah. It's like a way to store them, but then it's an activity too, because then they forget about it. And they're like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this, the little tiny snow globe, and because I'm like, I myself am like, I love the little tiny snow globe. I don't want to get rid of the little teeny tiny snow globe, but where do you put a teeny tiny snow globe in your house? It's like, It just goes to the bottom of the toy box. I mean, that is so. Anyway, that's one of my favorite things, and I still have those to this day.
Amazing! I very much appreciate that practical advice. Okay, for the sake of time, there's one more aphorism that I really want to touch on because I just think it's brilliant. So it's easier to change our surroundings and our schedules than to change ourselves.
Yes.
And this is something I try and preach to my kids pretty often. And I think about it with myself too. Like I want to be more patient with my kids when we're getting out of the house in the morning, right? And that's what I want to change about myself. But it's easier to just have fewer shoes for them to choose from, to make sure my keys are hanging where they belong. And when there's less clutter and a better system for getting out of the house, it's less stressful. And therefore, I'm going to be more patient with my children. And there's less to be patient about. So anyway, that's my little take on that. But what is something that you've changed in your surroundings personally that has helped you become more of the person that you want to be?
Well, one of the things is one of the things I wanted to do in 2025 is watercolor every day. And so one of the things I realized is like the more I have to like get things out and put them away, the less convenient they are. And then the kind of just the more friction there is. So like I created a station where it's like I can leave everything out. And then I'm not a fan of like buying things in order to put your clutter into order, because a lot of times you're just jamming more clutter into it. But a listener of the Happier Podcast told me about this like really inexpensive rolling three shelf cart. And I'm like, this is perfect. So I'm like, one is like all the different paper and one is like pallets and so it's like everything's very organized. It's right next to me. And I'm like, I could really like work on my willpower and like, you got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it. Or I could just make it so easy that when I walk by that station, I constantly am like, remember, you're supposed to watercolor today. It's right here. What's the right time to watercolor? Because by changing the surroundings, I was able to kind of like create a more inviting, like an enticement to do it.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. And it reminds me as well, I made a reel not too long ago that was like, if you want to declutter, the first step is not convincing yourself that this is important to you. That's great. But go get a trash bag. And put it next to the pile of things you want to declutter. And then don't declutter right then. You don't even have to declutter right then. Just put the trash bag next to the stuff that you want to go through.
Yes.
Because like you said, when you
start a box of giveaways, it's like once the box is there, you're like, a box wants to be full,
Yes, and you can just toss stuff into it. Like you said, it takes that friction out of it. And so, you can tell yourself all day long, I want to be, the kind of person, I want to change myself, but change your environment.
Well, that reminds me of another secret of adulthood, which is don't expect to be motivated by motivation. And I think you're right. A lot of times people work on their mindset and you're like, it's hard to change your mindset. And does it even really matter if you change your mindset? Arguably not as much as you think. Set up your surroundings, make it easy to give things away. Or what some people do, I know somebody who like arranged for a pickup in 3 weeks, and she's like, well, I've got to get it all done in 3 weeks because they're going to come have a pickup. Wait, here's a story I have to tell you because I know you will love it as much as I do. So I have a friend from college who had like 3 big strapping boys in college during COVID. And she lived in a big house in the suburbs, attic, basement, garage, all of it. And so here come her 3 boys back to stay at home because of lockdown. So brilliant. Right at the last minute before everything shuts down, she gets a dumpster. And she spends the entire period of COVID getting her 3 boys running up and down the stairs, carrying things, taking things to the dumpster, dropping things off, organizing things, going through their own stuff. And so by the end of it, she's like, we've been saying that we wanted to downsize and now we're ready to sell the house and I was like, the brilliant thing for you was that you saw this was an opportunity, because I'm like, that's foresight, which is to get the dumpster. But right, like having the dumpster was like, okay, now that's a way to change your surroundings, just the way that putting a trash bag there is a way to change your surroundings. It's like, get yourself moving in the direction that you want to travel.
Oh, yes, 100%. Is that another aphorism? Get yourself moving. It should be. It's pretty good.
It should be. Write
that one down. Exactly.
Write that one down.
Do you follow the Holderness family by any chance on social media?
I do. Yeah.
They do these parody songs, and they had a great one, and they got a dumpster, and it was all about,
I saw that. No, it was like, our lives are forever changed. No, it is funny. We got a lake house recently and we had a dumpster there for a while. And I was like, this is the greatest thing of all time. There is something just like, okay, it's just.
We just moved to a military base. I mentioned to you we're in Alaska. So we just moved here a couple weeks ago. And we're living on base. And so they have big like base dumpsters. And it's the best thing of my entire life. I'm like, honey, let's just swing by the dumpster on the way out. Like, this is the best thing. But anyways, all right. So I know we have to wrap up. I'm looking at the time. I always do this, Gretchen. When I have a guest, particularly when I have a guest that I'm very excited to talk to, I write down just probably twice as many questions as I can get to. And I always tell myself not to do this, but here we are yet again. So let me see. What's my last question for you? With all you've researched and experienced and produced, how has your definition of success or happiness shifted over time?
That is a great question. And maybe because I started my career in law, like I really don't like thinking about definitions because like we spent an entire semester arguing about the definition of contract. And, something like happiness, there's something like 15 academic definitions of happiness. And so I think that if I had to say what it looks like to me, it's more about bringing my life into an alignment with my own values, my own temperament, my own nature, my own strengths, my own weaknesses, really understanding myself and creating a life that reflects what's true about me. And I feel like this is the great challenge of life. I mean, you think, well, of course, yourself, you just hang out with yourself all day long, but it's actually a huge challenge. And so I think that for me is happiness, is knowing myself and bringing my life into alignment with that.
Yes. Something you say, at least I think in most of your books, is be Gretchen. Like
yes, exactly. Yep.
Number one rule. And I'm glad you said that because basically what you're saying is there's no one definition of happiness in terms of what it looks like on the outside or what you do, because it's so dependent on each of us and we're all so different. And actually, I had another question that maybe we can do real fast, but is how does that personal development of knowing who you are have a hand in paring down what's important to you or even paring down your belongings? Like, why do you think that knowing who you are and being conscious of what suits you. You say what suits you a lot. I always love that phrase when you say, does it suit me? Why is that important when it comes to knowing what we should keep or what we should let go?
Well, because I think that sometimes we keep too much because we don't really know what's important to us. So we're afraid that we're going to let go of something that's important. Whereas if you get really clear about what your values are and why you're doing what you're doing, it's much clearer. I had an experience because I mentioned we got this lake house. And so my parents live in Kansas City and they have some of our old toys. And something that I really loved was our our Fisher-Price castle. And I thought, my mother was sending me some stuff, and I'm like, do I want the Fisher-Price castle, or is it just clutter? And then I was like, this is something that I have loved for as long as I can remember. It's really important to me. It makes me happy just to look at it. I'm like, yeah, send me the castle, because I knew that it was important to me. But there's so many other things where I'm like, yeah, I don't even care about that. Like, we don't need that. We can let go of that. And it's funny how sometimes the strangest things become important. Like in my parents' kitchen, they have this brown mixing bowl. And I'm like, to me, that symbolizes like kind of the continuity of objects, where like people come and go, people die, and yet these objects remain. And I'm like, I will, I will have that brown mixing bowl in my life in some way until I die, because to me it represents that. But they've got a million bazillion other things that I've grown up through my whole life. And I'm like, I don't care about that. That's not important. And just using our objects to like project our identity into our environment, like what's important. Like a lot of people are saying like, oh, don't you want to get rid of all these books? And I'm like, no, these books are super important to me. Or people will say like, why don't you color block them, or why don't you arrange them more decoratively? And I'm like, because I actually use these books. They have to be arranged in an order so that I can find what I'm looking for. Like that to me is more important than the visual of the books being organized. But to somebody else, that's not so important. So they could, I was just talking to a guy, his wife doesn't like the look of books on shelves, but he has a big under the stairs closet. And so he was saying maybe they would put shelves, but it kind of doesn't lend itself to anything. And he was thinking maybe they'd put shelves and put books in there. And I'm like, that would be amazing. It would be so whimsical. You could have like a little tiny reading chair in there. You'd open up the door. You could paint the door a really cool color, and it'd be like this secret library. I'm like, this would be amazing. Yes. And all of a sudden, instead of being like, kind of bickering about, oh my gosh, I don't want to have all these old paperbacks around. You're like, oh, I like having those old paperbacks around. They're important to me. It's like, let's find some cool way that we can both have what we have. Like his books are like highlighted and treasured in this very interesting way. And she's got this stuff off her shelves. So, I mean, you might have your own take on like whether one of them is right or wrong or whatever. But I thought this is such a great solution.
Yes. Oh my gosh. No, that sounds like heaven. I want a really tiny little library, like a little secret library. That sounds so fun. No, it's so true that, like you said, when you know yourself, you can feel when you have that visceral reaction to something, and then use it accordingly.
You feel it. You know it's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. And that comes from knowing ourselves. So speaking of knowing ourselves, where can everyone find your work and follow along? Even, I know you just started a summer reading challenge, which is so awesome. I think reading is one of the best ways to get, if you're like, I don't know, how do I get to know myself? Like, I just want to declutter my house. But this deeper self-development work is going to make that so much easier, because like Gretchen and I were just saying, that means that you're going to be able to identify what is the good stuff to keep versus what to get rid of. And the best way I've ever experienced with figuring out who I am is reading a lot, because then that gets your thoughts going, and that, I don't know. I'm just a huge fan of reading. So can you tell everyone about your summer reading challenge and where they can buy your work?
Oh, yes. Go to my website for everything. I've got all kinds of resources. I got to design your summer. The thing about the read on the Happier podcast. And every year we have an annual challenge. So it was like walk 20 and 20, walk 20 minutes in 2020. And this year it's read 25 and 25. So we're challenging people to read 25 minutes a day. And like, you're never too late. Like, it's always a good time to jump in. It's super fun. A lot of people love to read. They just have to be reminded that it's something that they want to make part of their day. And I'm on social media and all the places as Gretchen Rubin. On my website, there are the quizzes that we mentioned, the 4 tendencies quiz. I also have a 5 senses quiz that's super fun if you're interested in the 5 senses. I love a quiz. I love self-knowledge, and a quiz is a great instrument of self-knowledge. And then you can read there about all my books that we talked about, and ones that we didn't even talk about. I got so many books. You can learn about the podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin. You can sign up for my newsletter, 5 Things Making Me Happy. If you kind of like things making me happy, or on Substack, Secrets of Adulthood is more like teaching stories. So if you love kind of a fable or a teaching story, a parable, a secular parable, that's on Secrets. That's in, and those are among, of everything that I write, those are among my very favorite things that I write. So I'm really excited to have started that. So I'm all over the place. There's more. Are you going to listen to the audiobooks? Listen to, it's on YouTube. I got it. I'm in all the places.
I will make sure all of that is in the show notes. I do love your Substack. I think we all learn best through narrative. I mean, that's just human nature. And
that's exactly, you put your finger exactly on it, which is, I was like that I was really wanting to explore that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again, Gretchen. It is a true honor of mine to be able to kind of host this interview. And I know that my audience is just going to gobble this up. And just thank you for all the work that you do to help all of us live more in tune with who we are. The work you do is invaluable.
Oh, it's thank you so much. It makes me so happy to know that it struck such a chord with you. So thank you. I loved our conversation. I feel like we could talk all day.
Me too. You just listened to an episode of Paring Down with me, Shannon Leyko. If you enjoyed the show, it would mean the world if you can leave a review wherever you listen and share this episode with a friend. Those reviews really are what keeps a podcast on its feet for the long haul, and I will read every single one with a huge smile on my face. So thank you ahead of time. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at paring_down, where I offer lots of tips and inspiration for paring down, along with what's new here on the podcast. Till next time.